Oi, oi, good morning, true crime fans. Today we are discussing the murders of two beautiful and radiant young women, Shafilea Ahmed and Banaz Mahmod. These young women were lovely, soft, caring, intelligent women who should be alive today with their own families in a safe and secure Britain. What went wrong? Why were they killed? And what are the factors and reasons that lead to honour based violence and also lead to honour killings? Thank you for joining me today. This is Filthy Ketchup. We are starting with the case of Banaz Mahmood, a beautiful young woman who was murdered in 2006 by three of her cousins at the behest of her own father and uncle. Banaz Mahmood was born on the 16th of December 1985 in Iraqi Kurdistan, and she emigrated to Britain with her family when she was 10 as refugees from Saddam Hussein. We know very little about Banaz's early life, but we do know that she was a very caring and gentle young woman. Her nickname was Naska, which is Kurdish for soft as a lamb, and her teacher, the chief investigating officer who investigated her murder, Caroline Good, said that when she spoke to Banaz's teacher, Banaz's teacher spoke very, very highly of Banaz. She said that she was very caring, lovely, and nurturing young woman, and really acted as a little mother towards her little brothers and sisters. She had absolutely no social network, no friends of any kind. Outside of her family, she was completely isolated, so she was absolutely dependent on her family for everything. When she was 17, she was forced into an arranged marriage with a man called Ari. Ari was completely illiterate. He was just off the plane from Iraq. He was what she would call very, very old fashioned. Now, I'm going to pause in Banaz's story here just to explain a little bit of the differences between British culture and traditional Muslim culture. A British woman is very much an individual, you know, but with these big families, these big interdependent families, the family name is like a brand. It's like you're part of that family, and your family name is a brand, so everything you do reflects not just on you but on the family, on the community, upon the entire community. And the honour based ethos means that a woman is singularly and disproportionately responsible for a family's honour. A family's honour rests entirely in the female. Everything the female does reflects on the family, not just on herself, but on her parents, on her brothers and sisters, upon the whole collective, upon the whole community. It's very, very difficult for us to understand because of the freedoms we have and the autonomy we have about why a young woman is solely responsible for the family's honour. And be that as it may, that's where the honour ethos comes from. You know, lots of young people, young Muslim people, there is an identity crisis in Britain at the moment, and people are taking refuge in traditional established cultural mores. As one young man put it, man is a piece of gold and woman is a piece of silk. If you drop gold in mud, you can pick it up and wipe it clean. But if you drop a piece of silk in mud, it's stained forever. And that is their view of a woman's honour. Everything she does reflects on her character forever. They're stained forever. They are forever stained. And in these patrilocal societies, when you're absolutely dependent on your family, for a British Anglo-Saxon woman who is suffering any form of domestic violence, it's hard enough for us to report that domestic violence and come forward. Imagine if the only people you have are your husband who's abusing you and your family who's encouraging that abuse, and you are a young 17 or 18-year-old girl. It has to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to escape that relationship. And it was because of Banaz's attempts to escape that abusive, terrible relationship that her family had forced her into that caused this young woman's death. So, as I said, Banaz Mahmod emigrated to England at the age of 10 as refugees from Saddam Hussein. Her and she was part of 4 sisters and 1 brother. Now, all of her sisters and Banaz, apart from the youngest girl in the house, had all been circumcised. If you don't know what FGM is, female genital mutilation, what they do is when a girl is about 7 or 8 years old, they send all the men out of the house, they strip the girl to the waist, force her legs apart, and they take a razor and just cut everything off, the lips and the clitoris. There's no anaesthetic, there's no stitches, there's no type of, cleanliness. It's not sterile, it's just a bare razor. They rip everything off to take away all the pleasure from a woman. Again, it's about control, it's about honour. If a woman doesn't feel sexual, then she won't betray the family honour. Banaz and her sisters were subjected to this terrible, terrible practice. After this happened to her, her family emigrated to Britain. She was just 10 years old, and British culture is obviously very different. British girls and women have much more autonomy here, that we have much more freedom. And so there's a clash between 2 cultures. You've got a struggle between home culture and school culture. All our cultural mores, television, all our social interactions suggest that we should have freedom and autonomy, and for the men it's very, very hard to give up that primacy that they had, because the women and the girls that had unquestionably obeyed them in Iraq or Pakistan perhaps don't have that unquestioning obedience anymore. And for a lot of immigrant men, coming to Western countries involves a huge drop in status. They might go from being the head of a tribal family, to working menial jobs. And having that drop in status means that they intensify the control over their women and daughters as a kind of ego compensation. So Banaz came here when she was 10 years old, so there's a conflict between her home culture and her school culture. Banaz's older sister, Bekhal Mahmod, who gave evidence against her father and uncle at the trial of the murder of her sister. Bekhal first ran away from home when she was 16, Banaz's older sister, and her father, Mahmod, there are 2 men, as well as the 3 cousins that killed Banaz, who are central in this story. One is the uncle, Ari Mahmod, and the other is the father of Banaz, Mahmod. Now, these are tribal people, as I said. In Iraqi Kurdistan, these men would have been unquestionably obeyed. But when they moved to England, that wasn't the case. So when his oldest daughter, Bekhal Mahmod, ran away from home, he was seen to lose face in the community, and her older brother was actually paid by her father to, as he called it, put the shame to an end. Her brother lured Bekhal to supposedly the grandmother's house, When she got there, the brother said to her, okay, take the suitcase, I need you to carry this suitcase, walk in front of me, don't look at me, don't look what I'm doing. Bekar walked in front of him and was then smashed over the head with a dumbbell with an arm weight. He then attempted to arm lock her around the neck and strangle her. She managed to escape, and she ran away and she went into hiding and cut off all contact with her family because she was so scared of her safety. Even though she loved her sisters and brothers, for her own safety she had to cut herself off from her family. The only person that she kept in touch with periodically was Banaz. So this was going on in the background before any type of situation with Banaz. And when Banaz reached her 17th birthday, remember, she's a very, very young girl. She's completely dependent on her family. She has no social network, no friends of any kind. She's forced into an arranged marriage with a man called Ali, who was in his 40s, literally off the plane from Iraq. He was illiterate. They had absolutely nothing in common, and he was very, what she would call, old-fashioned. He was very, very misogynistic. He had power over a young girl, and he proceeded to abuse that power. Banaz Mahmod came forward with a statement of domestic violence to police, not once, but 5 times. Now remember, an Anglo-Saxon British woman, it's almost impossible for us to escape domestic violence. So can you imagine an 18-year-old girl who's gone through a year of abuse, who's being told by her own family that this abuse is normal, go back and be a better wife, go back and be a better wife. I mean, this man, Ali, when you see the video of the police statements of Banaz Mahmod, it's heartbreaking. The abuse that she details. He's kicking her in the head, he's battering her physically, he's subjecting her to hundreds and hundreds of rape. He was just forcing sex on her. You know, he humiliated her. He constantly subjected her to control and abuse. And Banaz so bravely put her foot down, and she said, I'm leaving, I've had enough, I want a divorce. But in that Muslim culture, leaving your husband is the worst thing to do for a woman. It's not allowed. But Banaz still insisted she wanted a divorce, and again Mahmod was seen to lose face within his community because of this. And this act of bravery on the part of Banaz Mahmod was the first step towards the terrible events that happened in 2006. Her murder by 3 of her cousins. The first step towards that morning of 24th of January 2006 was first taken when Banaz Mahmod bravely refused to put up with any more of her husband's abuse. Now, as I said, Banaz Mahmod made not 1 but 5 statements of domestic abuse to police. It took 3 months even for the police to file a report. She said that she was being followed constantly. They never chased this up. They never followed up any type of investigation. They literally took her statements and put them in a drawer. Now, on the police video of Banaz's statement, she said, there's people following me, they're following me, still now they follow me. Young Muslim women are subjected to constant surveillance. They're constantly being surveyed. You know, the men of the community watch everything they do. The way their hair's dressed, the makeup they wear, the people they talk to, who they spoke to, what was said. They're under a form of constant surveillance that they get used to, and that as British women we find difficult to understand. Now, Banaz bravely left her husband, and then she met Rahmat Suleimani. Now, initially, her and Rahma were just friends, and then that developed into a relationship. She suddenly found a lot of pleasure, a lot of joy, a lot of happiness in her life. Her and Rahma were very, very happy, but because she'd left her husband and because she got a boyfriend, Banaz was seen to bring dishonour on the family. Banaz and Rahmat were seen kissing at a tube station in Morton. As I said, they were under constant surveillance and they were seen kissing at Morton Station. Very quickly, a call was put in to the head of the family, Ari Mahmod, and that set in train a council of war where all the men of the family and the community got together and they put out a hit on Banaz Mahmod. We are not talking about domestic violence. Honour killings are not domestic violence, they are organised crime. You're talking about men sitting in a room deciding that somebody must die. This is a conspiratorial and communal crime. It's a communal crime involving the entire community, the entire family, the entire collective, and it was decided there and then that Banaz Mahmod must die. These big families are very large and they're very interdependent. It can be seen as a necessity to sacrifice one for the sake of all the rest. So on New Year's Eve 2005-2006, Banaz Mahmod was tricked into going to her grandmother's house. She gets there, the house is in total darkness, the curtains are drawn, and her father's there. He's got a bottle of brandy in a black bag. He basically forces her to drink the brandy. He says, sit down, drink the brandy, drink it slowly. Carry this suitcase into the house, don't look at me, don't look at what I'm doing, sit down, drink the brandy. But she did look behind her and she did look at her father, and her father had yellow marigold dishwashing gloves on and was coming up behind her and was attempting to strangle her. She had no shoes on, she had to break a window to get out. She had to smash a window to get out. She escaped her father. She ran down an alleyway. Now, of course, as a young Muslim girl, she's not used to alcohol, and it's New Year's Eve, okay? So she goes to hospital, she goes to A&E. The ambulance staff testified that they had never ever seen anybody so terrified. She gets to A&E. Rahmat Suleimani has the presence of mind to videotape what she's saying, and she records that, her father was trying to strangle her. I mean, when the police turned up, now the police at this stage had taken 5 statements from Banaz Mahmod about her domestic violence and what was happening in her family that they had never bothered to chase up and they had never bothered to file a report. When the policewoman turned up, she immediately decided that Banaz was just a young girl who was drunk, she drank too much and she was scared of getting into trouble, so she made up the story. I mean, there was just landslide of mistake after mistake after mistake from the police. It's taken the death of this beautiful young woman to put into place the safeguarding measures that we now have against honour-based violence and honour-based killing. But be that as it may, the policewoman was determined that this was just a young girl, she was drunk, she didn't want to get into trouble, and again it was mishandled. They actually went to her house to take a statement in front of her father and her family. So you've got a young woman, she's making a complaint that her father's tried to kill her. They go to her house to take her statement in front of her family and the people who are trying to kill her. I mean, it was just ridiculous, and that ramped up the danger even more. She was already in mortal danger, and the actions of the police just put a target on her back, and it was from this point forward that Banaz Mahmod was in real trouble. In January 2006, her boyfriend Rahmat Suleimani reported Banaz Mahmod missing. Detective Chief Inspector Caroline Good headed up the investigation into what was initially a missing persons case. Caroline Good said that she knew immediately that this was potentially a very, very serious crime, and one of the big kind of clues to that was that her family had not reported her missing. It was her boyfriend that had reported her missing, and the Kurdish community made hundreds and hundreds of false statements. The entire community knew what had happened to Banaz Mahmod, and it was seen as cool and somehow honourable to be involved in the death of this beautiful young woman. They all wanted to be involved in some way, so they made lots and lots of false statements to police. And police quickly discovered the history with Bakal Mahmud, the older sister of Banaz, and they tracked her down. And as soon as they said to her that her sister had gone missing, Bakal said she knew. She absolutely knew what had happened. She knew that the men were involved, and she was prepared to help the police. Now, just before her death, Banaz Mahmod gave a written statement to police. It's written in very childish handwriting, and she actually names all three of her killers. She said that she'd heard her mother on the phone talking about how these men were prepared to kill her and in what way they were going to kill her, and that note was accurate in every detail. Chief Inspector Caroline Good was able to use this note after her death, and she said that that was exactly what had happened to Banaz. In this written statement, she gives the names Muhammad Ali, Mohammed Hammer and Omar Hussein. All three of these men were cousins of each other, and they were cousins of Banaz. Quite deliberately, on the morning of 24th of January 2006, her parents left the house, and they left her in the house with her younger sister. Now, Banaz used to sleep on the living room floor of the house because there wasn't a bedroom for her. The three cousins, Muhammad Ali, Mohammed Hammer and Omar Hussein, ambushed Banaz in the early hours of the 24th of January 2006. They tortured her for over an hour. They absolutely tortured her. They raped her repeatedly. They stamped on her neck, and they strangled her with a ligature made out of a coat hanger. And the ligature strangulation is not a fun way to die, even if it's done efficiently. It is a terrible way to die, but these men didn't know what they were doing. They wrapped the coat hanger around her neck, stamped on her neck. It took her over an hour to suffocate to death. This was a terrible, terrible death. The judge that sentenced them called them callous and barbaric, and I have to agree. The way they killed her was intensely cowardly and callous. It would have taken her over an hour to die. They then put her body into a large suitcase, curled up in a fetal position, and buried it under a fridge freezer in Birmingham. The Mahmood family, as I said, didn't report her missing, and they showed absolutely no concern whatsoever when the police were investigating the case. They never, even when the police dragged the lake opposite their house, they never ever showed any interest whatsoever. They showed no concern or empathy for this beautiful young girl who never in her life harmed a soul. She was a completely innocent victim. The three cousins were recorded in covert police surveillance tapes, boasting and laughing to each other about the rape and torture of this young woman. The Kurdish community, again, all kept silent about it. Even though the majority of Muslims disagree with honour killings, they are forced to keep silent under the threat of violence. Now, Mohammed Hammer and Omar Hussein were actually the first people to be extradited in a honour killing case in Britain. Caroline Good was not going to let this go. She wanted these men caught and sentenced. All three of the cousins, two of them brought back from Iraq where they had fled to, they were extradited, and Bekar Mahmod very bravely gave evidence for the prosecution. Because she was given evidence for the prosecution, she had to be moved from safe house to safe house to safe house. The judge called the three cousins callous and barbaric, and as I said, I agree with that. Now, there are around 12 honour killings a year in the UK, which is a conservative estimate. Unfortunately, Rahmat Suleimani, the boyfriend of Banaz, killed himself in witness protection. He just couldn't live without Banaz. Banaz Mahmood was a beautiful, intelligent, wonderful young woman who had her whole life ahead of her, and that was barbarically cut short by a dishonourable, cowardly and callous murder. Next, we are discussing the case of Shafilea Ahmed, another beautiful young girl who was murdered on the 11th of September 2003 by her parents Iftikhar and Farzana Ahmed. Shafilea was born July the 14th, 1986. Shafilea and Farzana Ahmed had an arranged marriage. They were both first cousins, and Shafilia's death was brought about in part because she refused to marry her first cousin. This practice of marrying cousins is obviously very, very dangerous, and Shafilea also became a victim of this honour ethos. She was considered to have brought dishonour to her family. Although her father, Iftikhar Ahmed, had himself rebelled against his family when he was younger, if anyone should have sympathised with his daughter's plight, it was Iftikhar. Iftikhar had refused to marry his cousin Farzana Ahmed and was living with a Danish woman in Europe. In fact, when Farzana Ahmed first came over, Iftikhar introduced her to his Danish wife as his cousin, but then when a health worker turned up, he was forced to admit that Farzana was actually his wife, and his Danish wife left him. So Iftikhar himself had lived a very westernised lifestyle. He went clubbing all the time, he was known as a bit of a party boy. But when he was forced to marry his cousin Farzana and take care of Farzana, he became very bitter and took it out on his children. Farzana Ahmed as well had been brought up in a small village in Pakistan, and she was brought up with this almost servant-like attitude towards men. Women there were brought up to cook, to clean, to look after children. They were brought up almost as domestic servants, and some women want their daughters to be free and they don't want them to suffer that, and other women become very bitter and determined that their own daughters will suffer like they had, and Farzana Ahmed was one of these women. From the moment of Shafilea's birth, her mother Farzana concentrated all of her frustration and all of her bitterness onto her eldest daughter. Shafilea would later have sisters. There were, I think, 4 or 5 sisters in the family, but all of Farzana's frustration and abuse was concentrated on Shafilea, and this is very, very common for women who abuse children, including mothers. They might have a slew of potential victims all around them, but they concentrate all of their abuse onto one victim. Now, Shafilea was an extremely beautiful young woman. She was very intelligent, she was very well behaved, she wanted to be a solicitor. Had she been allowed to live, she would have been 35 this year, and society would have benefited enormously from her presence, but unfortunately she was born to a bitter and vengeful woman who would not allow this. Shafilea and Fazana's marriage, as I said, was arranged, and Fazana always knew that she had been forced onto Iftikhar, and because of this, her bitterness just overflew. She was determined as much as possible that Shafilea would be forced to carry on her footsteps, and she arranged a marriage to Shafilia's first cousin. As I've said, Iftikhar and Fazana were already cousins, and they wanted Shafilea to marry her first cousin. Now, they knew that there was no way Shafilea would get on that plane to Pakistan. She was only 16. She wanted to finish school. She wanted to be a solicitor. So what Iftikhar did, he went to his doctor. He said he had chronic insomnia, he hadn't slept for days, he needed something to knock him out, and his doctor said, well, okay, I'm not happy about this, I'll give you like 5 days worth of a very strong sleeping tablet, which is what they do. They don't give you weeks and weeks and weeks worth, they give you a few days at a time, especially if it's very strong medication. So that's what he did, and Iftikhar then drugged Shafilea to get her on the plane to Pakistan. By the time she knew what was going on, her passport had been confiscated and they were getting off at the airport in Pakistan. They then go to a wedding, and Shafilea was introduced to her potential bridegroom, who was twice her age, and she would have to live in this tiny village in Pakistan. Now, Shafilea was she was a typical 16-year-old girl. She liked R&B music, she wanted to continue her education, and she could see that her life in this village, there would be no music, there would be no entertainment, there would be no education. She would literally be a servant day in and day out, and that's it. She wouldn't even have her family, she would have no one. She had no passport, her passport had been taken away from her, and in desperation, in absolute desperation, she did not know what else to do. She drank a bottle of bleach. She drank a bottle of bleach that she found in the kitchen. Her esophagus and the top part of her chest was completely burned away. She could not swallow. The pain must have been agonising. She wasn't even taken to hospital. Shafilea did not receive hospital treatment for this injury until she came back to England almost 2 months later. So the pain that she endured, if you think about all the nerve endings and all the nerves that are in the throat, Shafilea really suffered. Her parents showed absolutely no concern and no empathy at all for their firstborn child. They got back on the plane to England and they just abandoned her in Pakistan. Now, because her esophagus and everything else was burnt, she couldn't eat. Her weight loss was really dramatic. And her relatives called her parents and said, listen, you need to come and get Shafilea. She can't eat, she can't keep anything down, she's getting really thin. And they were just disgusted. Fazana came back and picked up her firstborn daughter. And when Shafilea got back home, she was reluctantly taken to hospital by her father, Iftikhar, and it was all made out to be an accident. Nothing was followed up, although Shafilea had shown really dramatic weight loss. This should have been followed up, as even if the parents were saying it was an accident, it was clear that she had ingested bleach. Some type of follow-up should have had occurred, but it didn't. I mean, Shafilea herself reported, before she went to Pakistan, she reported to her friends at school, she'd reported to the council, she'd reported to lots of different agencies that she was suffering physical abuse at home, that her mother was locking her in her room and starving her to punish her. I mean, Fazana Ahmed really abused her oldest daughter for the entirety of her short and tragic life. And bleach ingestion should have been followed up, but it wasn't. And from this time forward, as Shafilea began to slowly recover and pick up the threads of her life, Fazana Ahmed could see that at some point Shafilea would be out from under her thumb, and she could just not allow that. As Shafilea recovered, she got a part-time job, she picked up the threads of her education, and as I said, Fazana's bitterness and jealousy just increased day by day. She came home from work one day and Fazana exploded over she was wearing a low-cut t-shirt or something like that, some pettiness like that. And Fazana and Iftikhar beat their firstborn daughter and held her down on the couch. Now, according to the testimony at the trial of Alicia Ahmed, the next youngest daughter, it was the mother who gave the order to kill by shouting in Urdu, "Just finish it here." Iftikhar held his daughter down, and Fazana Ahmed stuffed a plastic bag into her daughter's mouth and held her nose and mouth shut in a procedure known as burking. From the two Scottish murderers, Burke and Hare, who used to suffocate their victims, burking is where you hold someone's nose and mouth shut to suffocate them. Now, again, this would not have been a quick death. This suffocation would have taken at least 15 or 20 minutes. So for that 15 or 20 minutes, Fazana Ahmed was deliberately holding a plastic bag in her daughter's mouth and suffocating her by squeezing her nose and mouth shut. Shafilea Ahmed would have been fighting for her life. She would have been kicking her legs, she would have been flailing her arms. Her father held her down so that Fazana Ahmed could kill her daughter in this disgusting and callous manner. Iftikhar then disposed of the body. Iftikhar was a taxi driver. He wrapped the body in black bags. He drove it out to the woods. He dismembered the body. He actually cut the body up and disposed of the pieces. Now, when Fazana and Iftikhar were questioned by police about their daughter being missing, they immediately called racism. They called the police racist. They had news conferences where they accused the police of racism and racist behaviour. When they were questioned by the media in these news conferences, Fazana Ahmed gave a very convincing performance of a grieving mother, dabbing her eyes, pretending to cry. Iftikhar very straightforwardly looked straight into the camera, said, "There is no way we could murder our daughter," yada 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 yada. But a few years later, Fazana and Iftikhar had actually used the death of Shafilea to threaten the other children. If you step out of line, this is what will happen to you. Now, a couple of years later, Alicia Ahmed, which is the next daughter down, robbed her father's house in Warrington, and when the police picked her up, when Shafilea went missing, the police had put covert listening devices into the house of Fazana and Iftikhar Ahmed, and they picked up Fazana and Iftikhar saying things like, "If you know how to get the press on your side, you can get away with murder in this country. There's no way they can catch us, blah 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 blah." But they couldn't get a straightforward admission of murder. But the police picked up enough to know that Fazana and Iftikhar were guilty. They just couldn't prove it. So that when Alicia was picked up for robbing her dad's house, they had a golden opportunity to get the truth of what happened. And in fact, Alicia had been carrying a lot of guilt about what had happened to her sister because she couldn't save her, even though she would have only been about 12 or 13 at the time. She still felt guilty about it, and she gave a full statement detailing what had happened, the suffocation of Shafilea. And Iftikhar and Fazana Ahmed were both arrested and charged with murder. Now, as soon on the listening devices, Fazana Ahmed, you could tell Fazana Ahmed was the one who wore the trousers in that family. She wore the pants in that family. She gave the orders. She told everyone what to do. As soon as it became clear that she was looking at 25 to life, she immediately throws Iftikhar under the bus and starts pretending to be like a battered wife, talking in a very quiet tone. And again, like dabbing her eyes, and there was nothing I could do, and I was too scared to do anything. You know, she was a very bad actress. Push come to shove, you know, they were both found guilty of murder. They were sentenced on August the 12th, 2012. They were found guilty and sentenced to 25 to life with a minimum term of 25 years. They are exactly where they need to be. Shafilea Ahmed was a beautiful, intelligent, and wonderful young woman. Banaz Mahmod was a beautiful, intelligent, caring young woman. Society has lost these two wonderful young women because of dishonourable, callous, and cowardly murder. There is no honour in murder. Honour killing is a complete misnomer. There is no honour in violence, and there is no honour in murder. The perpetrators of these crimes are exactly where they need to be. Thank you for joining me today. This is Filthy Ketchup. Wherever you are, stay safe, make good choices. Bye.